Hey guys, welcome to the Testing 123 podcast. Today we're going to be talking about worship. There's some highlights in here, and then there's definitely some distractions in this podcast. But I think it's worth the ride. But first, Lester, got a question for you. I don't want you to. I'm not talking about the political side of the lockdown, but what has been some things you've been doing to entertain yourself? I mean, most of us are in our homes. I mean, some of us can go out for work and stuff like that, but got any entertainment tips, things you've been doing?
Not too much, honestly. Renee and we bought a Traeger over the Christmas break, so that was fun. I've been smoking all kinds of meat on there. I actually had steaks last night for the first time. I threw some steaks on there, some ribeyes. Dude, those turned out unbelievable.
Here's the real question now. Forget the first question. How long until you turn into one of those guys who all you do is talk about your grill?
Oh, dude, I'm sending up for New Balances tomorrow.
Like, I don't mean to be rude, but I only know one other person with a Traeger, and you know them too. And
does his name start with a G and rhyme with egg?
Yes, love the guy, absolutely love him. But like sometimes it's like I don't know how to, like me, I don't know anything about grills. So when people talk about them, like, okay, I cook burgers until they're done, you know? I just don't have the passion. You know what? I shouldn't judge. I should probably stay off it. It just, I don't have the passion. And I could see it in your eyes. As soon as you said you got a Traeger, you were ready to tell me about the jerky you made last week. Oh, okay, rib? Here's what I did. I seasoned it for 6 hours, and then, you got to get on there, really just work it into the meat, just like, that's to me. Yeah, exactly. And hey, everything I see come off those grills looks great. I'd eat it all.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I'm not like huge. The thing is, we didn't have a barbecue. And growing up, all my friends' houses had barbecues, and I didn't have a barbecue at my house.
But here's the difference. You didn't say you got a barbecue. You said you got a Traeger. You named the barbecue you got. Like, you didn't say like, oh yeah, like I just like invested, got a barbecue so I could kiss some steak. You're like, hey, I got a Traeger, okay?
Yeah.
I got a Traeger.
Because I'm not a filthy propane. I'm not a filthy casual.
Just smoke. No. At my house, I have a Traeger and we smoke meat. So like, I'm just.
It's I'm not just out here grilling burgers.
You do you, but Anthony's laughing. Anthony knows exactly what I'm talking about right now. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. Actually, have you guys here? I'll end it. I'll end this madness before we go in one question. Have you guys seen the show Superstore?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic! I just started watching it. I'd never seen it before. At the start, like the main character Amy, her husband comes in and he's like a grill guy. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Definitely worth watching because he says he's the grill guy and then he goes, yeah, I just hate like when they cut from like the start to just like the meal being done, and his videos are just him standing beside his barbecue for like 3 hours waiting for the meat to be done. It's so subtle on the side. Definitely gave me a good laugh.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm picturing you from now on by your grill, Lester, is just standing there by the side. Just
I love it.
All right, now that I got my Traeger rant out of the way, why don't we jump into something that's a lot more important than how you feel about a barbecue? Why don't we talk about worship? We'll be back in a second. Hey guys, welcome back to the Testing 123 maybe has another name podcast. We are live and we are talking today about worship. Little bit different podcast for us because we're actually remote, so we're doing this first time remote. So if it's weird, well, we'll use that as an excuse. But I'm going to throw it over to Lester right away to jump into this idea of worship, what it is, how do we do it, and maybe just explore areas like that.
Yeah, I think it's always good to have a little bit of duct tape in your production to keep you humble. It's always fun. You don't want to be too overproduced, otherwise.
I mean, I think there's a lot of duct tape in our production to keep us humble. I don't think that's the issue right now.
Get too big for our britches with all of our 2 viewers.
Well, our success is really not helping us stay grounded. So all 6 people that have heard of the podcast.
Yeah. I think we actually do have at least 6 listeners. I personally can vouch for at least 6 people that are listening to us, so it's huge. Anyway, the idea today, the big topic today is worship. We're talking about a theological topic today, and we're going to be talking a little bit about what is worship and the idea that we are made to worship, and how this idea actually comes straight from the Bible. Isaiah 43, for example, says, "The people whom I formed for myself, that they might declare my praise." So that's one of those concepts that Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, is referring to Genesis, where God creates man and women. And that's not just, because God is bored. God desires for us to worship him, and that's the way that he made us.
Yeah, I
So,
mean,
yeah, go ahead.
yes. Sorry. Wow, our first delay because we don't know who's speaking. Yeah, no, I like that. I like how you let in there. Why don't we hit them with the definition of where we're going to kind of lead this?
Yeah, so the full definition, and it's a bit of a wordy one, as we tend to do on these kinds of podcasts, but we're going to break it down. But worship is the act of ascribing worth to God. Big words there. Don't worry. We're going to define those.
Ooh.
When we worship, we devote our attention and our energy towards him in recognition that he alone is deserving of our praise. So I'm going to pause it right there. The definition isn't finished, actually. There's like 4 more lines to it, but we're going to stop right there and just break that down first. So worship is the act of ascribing worth to God. What that means is we are giving God the glory that is due to him. So, for example, we often think of ourselves as having rights, right? Like I have the right to vote. I have the right to this, that, and the third,
An
lots of
attorney.
rights. An attorney, whatever. But God's right, because of who he is deserving of worship. And literally, he is the only being that has that quality. He is deserving of worship just because of who he is.
I'm going to
Nothing
jump in.
else. Go ahead.
Want to stop. Yeah, I want to stop you there. I mean, obviously, there's not going to be disagreement on this podcast, but we're going to get to later to like how we worship and like maybe more of a secular view of like what worship can mean to other people. But that's a pretty big statement to say like, hey, this being or person, well, I'm not going to say person but like deserves our worship, like has a right to our worship. Obviously, if you're Christian, then you have that belief set, like you understand that, hey, God, like not even just deserves, but like requests our worship, and is like, I don't want to, there's like a bunch of words I could use that would be confusing, but I like how you put it with like has a right to our worship. And I think that's just an interesting thought for someone who's a non-Christian to be like, okay, but why? Why does this thing or human, like, because that would be their viewpoint. Why do they have a right to my worship?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that is a valid viewpoint, right? Like, if I don't believe in a God, why does he deserve my worship? Why does he have a right to my worship? And it's a valid point, but the thing is, let's philosophically look at that and say, assume that there is a God. Let's just assume that there is a God for argument's purpose. If God actually exists, and he, like the Bible says, created the heavens and the earth and all that's within it, and he actually saved us, then by definition, God is the greatest being in existence. There would be nothing greater than God. And so, being the greatest thing in existence, being the source of all things, he then ought to be worshipped. He would be the only thing always deserving of our worship because he is ultimate. Sometimes I think in the past we've talked about Thomas Aquinas and his reasons for the existence of God and the comparative, good, better, best. Well, God is definitionally the best. He's always the best because he's God. And so if that thing is the best, then it is deserving of our worship, bar none. There is nothing else that is more deserving of worship other than God.
Yeah. So I mean, the point being made is you worship the best of whatever that is, right? Is what you're saying.
Yeah.
I just think if I was a non-Christian sitting here, I'd be like, okay, but just because something's the best, do I really have to worship it? And I mean, the rest of our definition is really going to break down what we mean by that. I think people sometimes view worship as like you should be the guy who's like, you know, naked in the front lawn, bowing to the sky. Like that's probably a weird imagery, but like I think we that's our like we view worship as like a fanatical like expression of raw emotion, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
Um, and I think we'll break it down more. That is a concept I think some Christians need to tackle as well. Like God has the right to our worship. Like He is the greatest and the best, and like so by not worshiping Him, like you're not doing what God has designed for us.
Exactly right. And on top of that, God actually commands that we worship him. So not only does he actually have that right, like just inherently God is worthy of our worship, but also he commands it. So there's like a double imperative. Worship him. I mean, just for example, like Psalm 96, the psalmist commands, sing to the Lord a new song, sing to the Lord all the earth, sing to the Lord, praise his name, proclaim his salvation day after day. And all of those verbs in the Hebrew, they are actually the commanding version. Like it's so in Hebrew, sometimes verbs can be like what's called a jussive. So that would be like a suggestion. I'm trying to make a suggestion to you, or like it would be a request kind of a thing. No, but here it's a command. Like you must do this. If you don't do this, you are disobeying. So
It's a must, not a should. The
yeah,
verbiage is saying not, hey, you should do this. It's a good idea. We shouldn't be reading it like that. Like, oh, good idea to worship God, but like, hey, it's just like a good idea. No, it's like you must. This is like a commandment.
absolutely, yeah. And
Yeah.
so, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. I was gonna say I don't want to stay on one idea for too long because then we're gonna be here for like
Yeah.
5 hours just breaking down why we should worship God. Which I mean,
Well, we must.
most of our listeners have probably got past that roadblock, we'll say.
Mhm. Yeah.
So why don't we jump to the next part of the definition, which is when we worship, we devote our attention and our energy towards Him in recognition that He alone is deserving of our praise.
Right. So we're kind of touching on that same idea that he alone is deserving of our praise. We kind of just talked about that God alone has that right. But when we worship, we devote our attention and our energy towards him. And that's that whole idea that Christianity, my faith in God and who God is not just kind of an add-on to my life. I think a lot of us, I don't think we say that and we don't think that, but a lot of the times that's the way we behave. Like church is for Sunday, and maybe I go to life group on Monday or Tuesday night. And that's where that's where I keep my Christianity. Maybe if I'm really good, like I'll also pray during my meal times. And, I kind of schedule in my Christianity, get my bonus points or experience points in on Sunday morning and a Wednesday night, and we're good to go. Like, no, but what we're saying here with worship is that we devote our attention and our energy towards him. This is all of who I am. This is the core of my focus as a person.
Yeah, I think what you're touching on earlier is like it's not like there's a separate like it's not like some actions are deemed like, oh, I'm now in worship mode, like activate worship mode. I'm now worshiping, and then like unactivate worship mode. I'm now just like hanging out with my friends. Like those aren't mutually exclusive.
Exactly.
I think maybe we think they're mutually exclusive because we always just view, I mean, a lot of people just view worship as like, hey, we did worship, we sang, and now I'm listening to the pastor, and they view that's what worship is, right? And if that's your definition of worship, then you would have like a mode you activate and a mode you unactivate, if that makes any sense, like what you're talking about, like, hey, we're going to worship God by prayer before we eat, but then just like eat, don't worry about anything else. Like we did our worship, we got the points in, like we're good to go. This is like, no, we devote our attention and energy. Like that's all of us. Yeah. So it doesn't matter that it's just like Sunday morning, just kicking back. Like, oh, I crushed it Sunday morning. 10 out of 10. But Sunday afternoon when I'm watching football with the boys, which is like not that that's a bad thing to do, but like I'm still in my actions and my energy worshiping God.
Yeah, well, at least you ought to be. And if
Yeah.
you aren't worshiping God, you're worshiping something. And that's kind of a point I wanted to touch on. Because God designed us that way, that God designed us inherently to worship, as we talked about in Isaiah. We automatically default all the time to worshiping something. We always prioritize something, and we're always chasing after something. So one of the most popular things you see on social media today is the idea of self a little bit more, and you're going to be happy. If you love yourself, then all your problems will go away and all your self-esteem issues will be solved if you just love yourself a little bit more. You're perfect the way you are. And that is really the worship of self, the worship of me. I am the center of my attention. I'm going to do me. And you're still worshiping. Just like we see in the past, people have worshiped jobs, people have worshiped money, people have worshiped relationships. People worship regardless of their circumstance. And on a Sunday afternoon, just like Brett was talking about, if we aren't keeping God at the center of our attention, we can end up worshiping Peyton Manning. We can end up worshiping Patrick Mahomes. That guy has a heck of an arm.
Yeah,
all
I
those
don't
things.
want to. I do want to push back on a little bit what you're saying, because obviously I agree with there's a huge trend of worshiping the self and like the desires that are within. I mean, we talk about that. This idea comes up on like every podcast we do of like just doing what is best for you, and then in turn you're kind of worshiping yourself. I do want to point out like when this definition says our energy and intention, and Lester's talking about like where is our energy and intention, I would disagree with that. If I'm like, I think some people take that and they go, okay, so I'm just reading the Bible, praying, and singing all day long. That's all I can do. There's nothing else I can do because my energy and my attention somewhere else, and so I'm not worshiping, and that I just that's all I can do. No, I totally disagree with that.
No.
So I don't want people to be like, are Brett and Lester saying like if I'm not doing something like, reading my Bible, praying, thinking on God, like I'm just not worshiping him and therefore I'm like in sin? Like, no, that is not what we're saying.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be out here like, oh, we all have to go to the monastery right now and we have to all become monks and think about nothing else but prayer and the word all day long. No, the idea there is that God is the reason that I'm doing the things that I'm doing. So, for example, if I'm hanging out, like we talked about, watching football with the boys, well, that is a time of fellowship where I'm connecting and building relationship with my brothers. And from those relationships, we can edify God, edify each other, and point each other towards God. The activity doesn't matter so much as the actual relationship and connection that you're building. In the same way, when
more intention you're getting it's more the intention behind it. Like obviously activity does certainly matter. Like at some point, no, my mind was on God when I was doing no, it definitely was not. But yeah, like hanging out and watching football with the guys, like that is not a bad thing unless you're worshiping. Like that's what you're consumed with. Like that's all you care about. You're just there to like consume this and like, this is your world right now, right?
Yeah.
Whereas being in community, having some fun, even watching football by yourself, I feel like we're attacking football right now. I love football, okay? I'm not attacking football.
Yeah.
I'm not attacking football, but we're saying that there's intentions and intentions and our attention matter, okay? So like not just the fact that you can even be doing things that are good, but with the wrong intention. Like maybe if we flip this the other way, there's people who do amazing things, but their attention and energy are not towards God. Like they're not focused on God in them. Therefore, they're not worshiping God.
Absolutely. Yeah, and this kind of just gets the next little sentence in our definition. It is worship is a practice in which we wholly submit ourselves to Him. That just sums it up, I think, for us. The whole idea that it's not necessary that I only read the Bible all day or I'm praying all day, but rather all of who I am is submitted to God. So in my job, in my work, while I'm doing my chores, all of those things are intended to serve God better. I'm trying to serve God and honor the responsibilities and blessings that He's given to me and use them to worship Him. So, for example, He has blessed me with a house, and when I take care of it, um, and maintain it well, I am able to then invite others to it. Maybe not now, but after, I'm able to invite others to it, and we are able to connect and fellowship and um, honor, and I'm able to honor God that way. And that starts with me doing something like cleaning out the gutters, picking
You
up
heard it
after
here first.
myself.
Clean your clean your gutters. Follow
Worship.
God, clean your gutters. Uh,
Put it on a t-shirt.
Put it on a t-shirt. No, but also, I want to go back to something that we touched on, and then we kind of flew by. Partly my fault. And we have been hitting on. But if you're not worshiping God, you're worshiping something.
Yeah.
And so this idea that we definitely have been like talking about is, listen, if you're doing these things without your energy, like your intention and your intention on God, then you're just worshiping whatever you've put over that. I mean, commonly people like the common example would be like if you're going to work and all you care about is just the money. I just want to make a ton of money, and that's how money is going to motivate my life. I'm going to be rich. I'm going to buy fun things and fancy things, and it's gonna be amazing. Well, then you're worshiping money because you're really just showing money. And making money is not a bad thing. Trust me.
No,
I'm
absolutely.
so pro making money. So like I'm not someone's like, oh, like we should all just like make minimum wage and serve God and just pray and read and fast all day long. No, go make some money. That's fantastic. But if all your life is consumed with making the money, when you show up to work, then you're what you're doing is you're saying, hey God, wait at the front door while I go to work. I'm going to worship somebody else.
Yeah, or something else, whatever.
Yeah, or something else.
Whatever it is. Exactly. So yeah, just to kind of round out our definition here, it goes on and says, it is important to understand that worship is initiated by God. We worship in response to His revelation. As believers, we worship one God who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now, that last little bit we're going to touch on we're going to really explore when we get into the doctrine and theology of the Trinity. But I really wanted to touch on this idea that worship is initiated by God. In Exodus 4:31, it says, and the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that He had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshiped. Notice what happens there. God visits them first. God is the one who inspires in their hearts to worship. If we think about it, we touched on this earlier, God created us to worship. And so the correct response, the response that we ought to be displaying towards God is worship. To top that, to add on top of that, think about this. God sent His Son, so the Father sends His Son to die on the cross for our sin. And then when we receive that sacrifice, when we accept Christ into our lives, God sends His Holy Spirit to dwell in us, and it is the Holy Spirit in us that activates that worship, that enables us to worship, that restores that purpose. Before, when we aren't with God, right? One of the famous theologians, Augustine, he refers to it as like a mirror that's curved inwards. He refers to all people like mirrors. If you follow the analogy, if a mirror's job is to reflect, right? And when God creates men and women, He creates them to reflect, be a reflection of His glory. That's why He says, let us make man in our image. And so men and women are supposed to be this reflection of who God is. But what sin has done is it's made that mirror curved inwards. There's a fancy Latin term for that, incurvatus in se. And so that mirror starts turning inwards, and it only reflects in on itself, and it becomes dark. Because if it's turned inwards, there's no light that gets in on it. But Christ's sacrifice on the cross unravels that mirror, makes it flat again, and it's able to reflect the light that is God.
Wow, you definitely planned that. That was good. That was good. I'm just gonna give it to you. That was good. Let's give the guy a hand if you're listening. That was good.
I actually didn't plan that. It was a thought that occurred to me, and it's something that I wrote a paper on in seminary. So
Okay.
that's why
some might say you just felt to worship God in that moment, and
yeah, sure,
that's the way you did.
But yeah, if we think about that inward turned mirror, right? That sin has made me inwardly turned, and I'm unable to actually accomplish my original purpose. Then
I really do like the analogy. I gotta be honest with you, because I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I kind of did. So no, but like it's a very easy thing to think of. Like a mirror turned in on itself just shows like nothingness really in itself, right? But as you open and as you like serve God, then you're showing more and more of God. And the goal is to be a mirror that just reflects God. Like that's the goal.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's where sanctification comes in. The whole process of becoming more and more like Christ. And initially when we start to unravel, we might have a bit of a distorted image, kind of like a curved mirror presents a distorted image. But as we become more and more sanctified, more and more like Christ, that mirror continues to unravel, and we can reflect more and more accurately who Christ is.
Yeah, I mean that's a good analogy. I think people, I think if I heard that, I would push back on a couple of things. Like, I would say don't view yourself as the mirror and be proud about the more you show God, because then you might be getting a little bit flawed. But like the mirror reflecting God is still flawed, and it's not the mirror doing anything great. It's God. It's just all you're doing is reflecting.
Yeah,
I think that's an important part of that analogy. Is like, listen, the mirror itself is a very, I don't want to say useless object, but like there's other mirrors that could do its job. Other people can reflect God.
Right.
God gives you your opportunity.
Yeah.
But like don't take pride in just being the mirror, I would say. Is that weird?
Exactly? Yeah. I mean, if you saw a beautiful picture reflected in a mirror,
right,
you wouldn't be like, "Oh, wow, that amazing mirror." You'd turn around and look at the picture. You'd
look at the quality of this mirror. Just look at it. Look at the reflection coming through. Yeah, you're obviously like the painting is what you're what you're going to be focused on. Exactly. And I think that's a good way to put it. Just because I just think the better. I mean, we've brought this up, but the more we pursue God and the more we become that mirror that shows Him, we're gonna face like bigger and harder challenges. And that's when you're gonna start to believe. I mean, if it's tempting not to believe. Like, hey, look at me, look how well I'm doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and that's when then we get back to this idea of worship. If you're saying, hey, look at me, look how well I'm doing, I don't think you're really focusing on God anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, it's always good to have a little duct tape on the mirror to keep it humble.
Yeah, like there's a human, and that's another thing I wanted to touch on when we talk about worship. Like, if you didn't get it from the start, there's a huge humility in worshiping God. Like we opened this podcast with saying like He has the right to be worshipped. Like He commands us to worship Him. You can argue that all day long, and I mean, if that's the point you're stuck on, then I mean, we'd love to have a talk. But like, if you believe that, then you should understand that there's a huge humility in that, to understanding like I am commanded and I will worship God. Like there's a huge stepping down and realizing that you're not the center of your life. Just like you said with the mirror, sometimes we get inward focus and we start just showing we start worshiping ourselves.
Yeah, and you just end up reflecting nothing, and it's just all dark and the famous mantra. Yeah, the famous mantra is less of me, more of Him.
Yeah, I mean, He must become greater, I must become less. Yeah. John 3:30.
Exactly.
We are going to move on because I don't want this podcast to be 6 hours, but also because I want to talk about something that I think I'm a little bit more excited to talk about is how we worship. And that, I mean, this is not us saying, I just want to preface this whole idea with us being like, hey, we are not telling you do these things and don't do these things. This is not like a to-do list. Like, we're just saying these are like areas that God has shown us we can worship, and things that like over time, like great people of faith have shown that like this is what God pleases God, and through the Bible we know that, and through Jesus' actions we know that.
Yeah. So we kind of touched on this idea earlier, that we often think about worship as the time that we spend on Sunday morning, singing His praises, and maybe you've got some worship tunes on in the car. Is that an old fogey thing to say, worship tunes? Maybe you've got some worship vibes going on in the car.
No, it's not. You know why? Because I definitely had these thoughts, like myself. I'm not even. There's no one else to throw under the bus but me. It's like, oh yeah, just like on my long drive, I turned on some worship tunes. It's just like worshiping God. Like, well, you just turned on music, man. You didn't do much. Maybe settle down.
I mean, maybe you did have a time of worship in your car. It's possible.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, we touched on this earlier, where like song isn't the only aspect where we worship God. I mean, it's huge. Singing together corporately in worship, that is a very important part of worship. Singing God's praises in music, whether you're at home alone or in the car, wherever you happen to be, that is part of worship. But we talked about this in the definition that worship really encompasses all of who we are and what we do. So John Piper says that the fuel of worship is the truth of a gracious, sovereign God. The furnace of worship is your spirit, and the heat of worship is the vital affections of reverence, fear, adoration, contrition, trust, joy, gratitude, and hope. Now, that's a really complicated definition, because John Piper is a lot smarter than I am, but don't worry, we're going to break it down. The whole idea of what happens when we worship is that the truth of the gracious, sovereign God. So the truth of who God is fuels our worship. And when we remember that, when we think on that, that affects all that we do in life. So that means that worship isn't limited to just singing songs. It includes things like prayer. It includes things like communion. It includes things like reading the Word of God. It includes when you do things for your It includes all those kinds of things. Little Springvale.
Yeah, Springvale reference
tie in there. But basically, what I'm saying is that all the things that we do, when they are oriented towards God correctly, when we are reflecting God correctly, those things are included in our worship. Taking out the garbage, worship, because you are serving.
Yeah, it could be easily summed up as your actions are your worship, your intentions are your worship, and your thoughts are your worship.
Absolutely.
Like,
yeah.
You are your worship. So if you're not, like, when we think of worship, we, like you already touched on, sometimes we just think of like the two ways, like, well, I sang and I read my Bible, so I worshiped God today. But it's not that. It's our, like, every action, treating someone with, like, being fair at your workplace, like being honest at your workplace, showing integrity. That's worshiping God, because God calls us to be honest and integral people. Like being, like helping somebody out when you have the chance. Like that's worshiping God, because God has called us to help out the least of these. Like it's not just like, oh, do the big things like going to church. It's like literally everything you can do. If you can do it with God on your, like, with the intention of God, following him, then yeah, you're worshiping God. So that's why when I said at the beginning, like hanging out, watching football with the guys can be worshiping God. Because if there's the intention of like, hey, I want to hang out, I want to be in community, I want to like support these guys, and we want to watch some football. Boom, there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, obviously there are some things that help us kind of get there, get into that mind space. And one of those things that is really important, you just touched on it, is actually getting into the Word every single day. How can I focus on God in all of my actions if I didn't spend disciplined time in the Word every day? Right? Like how are you going to get there?
How can I reflect God if I don't know who He is?
Exactly. That's beautiful.
Trying to get that mirror analogy back in. Really like that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, how can if I don't know what? And then people say, well, how do I know what God wants or who He is? Well, there's a pretty simple way to do that, Lester, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole book that talks about who God is. And not only that, but I mean, are we spending time in prayer? Are you actually disciplined in your prayer life? You know, are we doing a little bit more than what I like to call rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub type prayer for lunch and dinner?
I'm gonna push back on that.
Go ahead.
You know what? I'm not gonna tell you what defines a prayer and what doesn't define a prayer. If you want to say rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub, awesome. If you're really thankful for the grub, who are we to say, hey, that doesn't meet the lineage? There's not enough letters in the overall seg for it to count. I'm gonna push back on that, Lester. I'm gonna vehemently disagree with you on that.
Okay, we can talk about that when it comes time for the episode on prayer and reverence due God's name. I think that rub-a-dub-dub but thanks for the grub is not bad. I will give you that. That's not terrible. But you know,
just saying, I just as strong as I possibly can, I disagree with you. You could say rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub before your meal. You just gotta mean it, you know.
You heard it here first. That's how Brett thanks God for his meals.
I don't think I've actually said that at a meal ever in my life. Like I couldn't tell you of a time where when you said that, I was like, oh, that's I can't remember the last time I heard someone actually say that out loud. I'm gonna do that tonight. Family dinner.
Yeah, family dinner. It's prayer time. Brett, did you lead us in prayer?
Sorry, I got us off track there. Just for the point of disagreement. So we weren't agreeing on anything of this podcast. That was terrible. Warning: skip 2 minutes if you don't want to hear this part. We should have put before that.
Warning: huge distraction coming up.
Yeah.
I don't know what the point I was making was. But, disciplined prayer life.
To find it as well.
Yeah, disciplined prayer life is what we're talking about. And so outside of meal times, are we spending some time with God in prayer? And I'm not going to say like, oh, you have to do it in the morning or you have to do it at night. Like you've got to carve out some time in your schedule to be able to do that.
I'm going to suggest, though, I'm not going to say have to because I can't, but I would suggest trying to do it in the morning.
I would recommend it as well.
Yeah, I would. Only reason I recommend that is one, because it works. Like me and Lester both agree, it works for us. And two, it centers the start of your day on God rather than going all day and then like catching up with God. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying I found more success in starting my day with God. That's strictly a suggestion.
I totally agree. Like the first thing I do when I get into the office, I mean. Before I go to the office, I'll get into the word a little bit, but the first thing I do when I go into the office is sit down and spend 15 minutes in prayer. But the thing is, I mean, my job allows for that, and it's encouraged.
So I don't have that opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm not even allowed in my office right now because of COVID. I have to work from home and remote, and my job has me like I'm at businesses all over the area, right? So like, but at home I try to do that. So like. Whether it's 5 minutes one day and maybe I have 30 minutes another day, I'd say I probably err more on the 5 minutes side than 30 most days. But if I can at least just start, like even if it's just read a little bit and pray a sincere prayer, like, and then maybe I have time in the car, and I pray a little bit more. Like I can't walk into my office and be like, "Hey guys, give me 30 minutes. I'm just gonna go through the word here, and then we can get going." Like that's just not an option for me.
Yeah, I can't take your call right now.
Yeah, like sorry. I know we had a meeting booked for 9, but I actually have to spend the first 15 minutes in prayer. Then we can meet about what you need. I think that would hurt my job performance big time. Yeah. So I just wake up earlier. That's all you have to do. Just wake up 15 minutes earlier.
Yeah, it's just 15 minutes. I'm honestly, you're not going to get another REM cycle in there. So it's just 15 minutes.
You could cut one short though.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a whole other discussion on REM cycles.
And anyway, we're kind of now on a prayer talk. Let's get back to worship.
Yeah, let's get back. So Romans 12:1. The whole idea with Romans 12:1, and I'll read it to you real quick. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. So the whole idea of what Paul is saying here is that our whole selves is a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, if we orient ourselves correctly in worship. And that is really the goal. That's the goal of sanctification. That is the goal when we get to heaven, that we would be living in worship. When we get there, we see these images of heaven in the Bible. They kind of give us a foreshadowing what it's like, and there's a whole lot of worship going on. I mean, the angels are singing, we're singing, everybody's singing, and we're all just standing in awe of the amazing God who saved us. And so that's something I think that is important to remember each day, that this is a day that God has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it.
Song lyrics there for a second, but no.
No, that's actually the Bible. Well,
no, I know. I just anyone who's heard that knows the song when they were a kid.
For sure. Sing it, Brent.
No, I will not. Is there anything else you want to wrap up with? Any other major points you want to hit?
Yeah. Just kind of in summary, our worship, a lifestyle of worship comes from a life that is disciplined in spending time in the Word, in spending time in prayer, and spending time in communion with other believers. We touched on that a little bit with the football talk, but the whole idea is that when we spend time worshiping God with others, we are inspired to worship God even more.
And that's the idea of church. I mean, that's
exactly,
why we go to church on Sunday, is the idea to be together with other believers, praising God and worshiping God.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there on a Sunday morning where I can hear like the full weight of the congregation behind me and the band's going on up front, and like you can hear how loud the congregation is. Like when they're singing a banger, like I don't know, at Springvale it's Grapes in the Gardens, but like at different churches it's always like a different song. At MCBC for a time it was like Cornerstone or whatever. MCBC is my home church.
That had its run. From like
big time
13 to 17. That song was just
huge. Yeah, and there are some hymns that just get some churches going, but when hey man, hymns are
I
love a good hymn.
I haven't heard a hymn in a while in church. That's all I'm saying.
I love a good hymn, and some of those, the words, and when you hear the congregation going and the band going, something inside you like is reminded of how great God is. It brings you back to that place where you remember how God saved you. It brings you back there. And so I think that those things, or ingredients combined, lead to a life of worship.
Yeah, no, I agree a lot. I mean, I think I wouldn't put my suggestion to this podcast. Just don't put there isn't this pressure that you have to do all these things right and these things wrong. And if you don't do it this way, it's right. I think I would just focus on, hey, start with reading your Bible, and then God will reveal Himself more, and then you'll find out different ways you can worship Him. I mean, it's not a hard thing to solve. It's just you got to put in the work, right? You got to start learning more about Him. You got to start reading, and then you'll start to realize like opportunities you have and other ways that you can connect with God. I mean, I forget who's talking. I think it was like, we've been in lockdown for so long. So I mean, a couple Sundays ago, but just talking about finding those quiet places with God. I think it was Dustin. I think
Dustin.
Dustin. But he's just talking about finding those quiet places with God, and we've touched on prayer a lot here because that's a way we can connect with God and worship God. But those quiet places where we can listen, and they don't have to be like, all right, I'm in this room alone, all the doors are locked, I'm just focusing on God, staring at the skylight to heaven. Like he said, like just like that morning coffee in the morning is a place where he just feels connected to God, and he's just sitting in his kitchen, like smelling his coffee that he's drinking. Like, and those are the areas as we grow and we worship God more, we'll find things like that we're like, hey, like this is something I can do to really serve and worship God.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a good place to end it. So go ahead.
Awesome. Well, guys, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with another one because we're going to start releasing. Well, we have released them. We'll be back next week. Don't quite know our topic yet, but we'll post that sometime soon. Thanks for listening. And if always have any questions, email lester@springvale.org, and we would like to answer them. We'll even answer them on the pod if we can, if we think it's appropriate.
Yeah, no, quick thing though. Exciting new announcement. We do have an official email, testing123@springvale.org.
Oh, okay. Don't email Lester. He doesn't even want to hear your problems. Testing 1 2 3. Is that just testing and then just 1 2 3? There's no
straight up. Yeah.
That sounded. Yeah, it sounds pretty straightforward. I probably didn't need to ask that question. At springvale.org, and then we can get to it. And if you want, because sometimes we do answer people's questions like on the pod, just let us know if you want us let us know if it's okay to use your name, because I think we won't use people's names unless you guys like specify like, hey, I want you to use my name. Which even then we might not use your name, but just because I don't want us getting in trouble with like, oh, I kind of just wanted that to like you guys to address that. No one knew it was me. But yeah,
it was a really personal question.
Yeah, that was pretty personal. You just opened my whole life to it. But awesome. Thanks for listening, guys. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah.